Allison, I'd love to know a bit about your career journey and how you got to where you are.
Oh, uh, Again, I don't know where to start on this one. I currently today I work as a director of HR, which is very different from one company to another. But how it all started, I didn't know what I wanted to do out of high school, and into college, I kind of like went to the past and I studied in France. So like education is very different, and you have the general colleges and you also have like preparatory schools, and I went into one of them and eventually ended up like loving it. So I arrived at university where it's basically like the open world and you can have like different classes and you just pick and choose. And so I ended up going into a history major. And through that curriculum, I really got into sociology, anthropology, and I've always had this curiosity and appetite for people and just like understanding who they are, and always been fascinated by like the stories. And I think like, I always like felt that when I had those meaningful conversation, I would like just get out of this conversation like almost replenished and fulfilled. And so doing sociology and anthropology was definitely something that like was in the back of my mind, and I eventually like did that on the side as well as my studies. In actually the last year of my master's, I got to come to the US to finish my degree, and I was working on border identities, focusing on women. And it was just like a very, like now I'm
Mhm.
laughing out loud because my thesis was like definitely not very narrowed and focused, but
Mhm.
that explained kind of like how I was so interested in so many things, but I was like mostly interested in like that notion of identity. And so that took me to
Mhm.
working at the UN in gender-based violence. And I was working across different teams, different organizations. I had incredible people, and definitely people that I would call mentors. And throughout time, and now it's been almost like 6 7 years, like I feel like I have like things have changed around. Now they come to me for advice on different things because now I have this HR hat. But
Yeah.
I like it was super interesting because I really thought I would end up in the international field, and I've always like wanted to do something for advocacy, whether it was being a lawyer or just like do something that had a purpose and a meaning. And I actually changed like the course of my route, and I ended up in tech somehow. And that's how I ended up at Hired, where we both worked together. And I had no idea what, like skills in the tech space were, or like frameworks. And so I learned basically from scratch and from
Mhm.
people like around me, people like you that had more experience, and just like, developing the skill set that I already had in terms of like, setting people up for success and really owning their voice. And because I was coaching tech candidates, and it was super interesting because I think like the conversations and the people that I was coaching that really left a big impact on me were the people that were like they were struggling finding what it is that they wanted to do and what made them happy. And I remembered one of the questions that I would always ask was, what is important for you in your job search? What is important for you in your next move? Is it title? Is it compensation? Is it time? Is it long term, short term? And I think like just asking that question just like helps people figure out like, okay, like what are my top three priorities? And just like,
Mhm.
shift that focus from there. And coaching so many people, you start asking yourself this kind of
Oh
questions.
yeah.
And I think like, it helps like also like having been in that position and understanding how companies like hire the company cultures, the hiring manager side of things. It was super interesting because I felt like I wanted to do that more internally and see how that would grow, and how these people that you would essentially hire would become who they are in internally in an organization. And so I had this opportunity to join a very early stage French tech company. And at the time when I joined, there were like 15, 20 in New York and about 40 in Paris. And I joined as like I don't recall like my title. It was like a mix of everything, but I was essentially doing everything from
Startup.
office, from yeah, it's just like wearing different hats
Yeah.
and rapidly. And I was working directly with the CEO for about a year and a half during my time there. And rapidly I realized what I really enjoyed doing was like this business partnering aspect, which
Mhm.
is like in combination with like the company culture, the company vision, supporting like all the projects and processes that we had in place when it came to like the employee and the people experience, but also really be a partner to not just
Mhm.
leaders, not just mid-level management, but also employees to have like a sound ear when, you know,
Mhm.
they needed advice or someone to talk to. And typically, like, I never woke up one day and said I want to do HR. I feel like HR is like the kind of people that you stay away from. Uh, but I
Yeah.
really had this desire to change that. And I think like why I had such a inspiration in doing that is because I think like in most of your experiences in life, and that's just not valid for work, like you don't really know what you're looking for, what you want, but you learn definitely along the way what you don't want. And that's through people,
Mm.
experiences, situations that you've been put in. And you know, in my work today, and it hasn't really changed much in terms of, you know, maybe I have changed, you know, titles or changed companies, but I feel like what kept constant was always my desire to drive change, to really
Mhm.
empower people. And also knowing that like when you empower someone's voice, you're also helping the company shapes its vision and not just like shape its vision outside of the people being part of
Mhm.
that, but with them. And I think like that's definitely a dynamic that is, you know, still fascinating to me. And I feel like there's so much work to be done on that aspect. So that's how I got where I got. And I don't know if like that's a solid answer, but it's somehow
Yeah.
where how I got here.
You know what? I think a lot of people who might be trying to navigate their career might feel this doubt about where they are because they're expecting this linear path. You know, they're expecting to
Mm,
see a linear path. But anytime I talk to anyone who, you know, quote unquote, has that success on their resume, typically you'll see some twists and turns, even if they might not have branded themselves that way. I think on the outside, we tend to see the tip of the iceberg. We see this polished, professional, but what
uh-huh.
happens behind that or what it took to get there, often there's some twists and turns and, you know, some tough questions and no doubt, you know, some moments of pause too, right? So something that I heard in your story, which you ended there with, was this passion to empower people. So as
Mm.
HR director, I totally see that you're obviously spearheading, you know, that culture and that dynamic for an organization. So currently I understand that you're at dailymotion. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role there and what have you been up to lately?
Yeah. So when I joined Daily Motion, it was super interesting to me because that would have been my second French company. And I definitely feel at ease. And I think like we can relate speaking a little bit of French as well. I think like when you have those skill set, those languages, those different ways of thinking, it's really important to be able to put that into your work and what you're doing, because I feel like that's how you feel most aligned with where you should be. So when I joined, I mean, we're big, like there's a big presence in France. We have people in the APAC region, and then we have the US and Latin America that we're expanding. And so when I joined last year in December of 2020, it was definitely a transition period for them, defining the vision. Back in 2017, they were acquired by a big French group that owns other companies as well. And so for me, that was like super interesting to understand like how working. It was not it's funny because it's not the startup world anymore, but it's still functioning
Mhm.
like in that like space of like chaos, but also creativity and possibilities to try things and to shift. But
Mhm.
like it's always that constant like, you know, diligence about keeping the vision, keeping that at least midterm vision that can really rally people behind what we're doing. So when I joined, it was basically kind of, taking over the HR side of things on the US side. But not just that, I realized that like there was a strong will to really drive a global initiative when it came to like the culture, the people, what we're doing, and the effort to really bridge the gaps that have been created through time, which happens, when you have
Mhm.
offices throughout the world. I think like it can be really hard for the smaller offices to feel heard and seen. And so it felt right down my alley. So I think
Yeah.
like, I'm still doing like a lot of the work in the weeds as well. Like I feel like, when you take on such a challenge, it's like being able to roll up your sleeves and like just, do things that you've done in the past, and also encounter, different people, and just kind of I really believe all of us are systems. And when we join a companies, we join
Mm.
a system. And I think it's all about how that like energy works around. And like that's how I think about organizational change. It's like, okay, what is working today, what is not working. And so I feel like when you start a new role, especially like in HR, like you don't want to step in and say, okay, I'm gonna do this and change this. That's never the right move. I feel like being an observer and like also absorbing the different things that you're exposed to, having as many one-on-ones. I think like that's a
Mhm.
sociologist in me. I feel like, there's this thing that I remember. I didn't know that expression back then, but when I joined my first company hired, I remember people putting time on my calendar and saying, hey, can I pick your brain? And I would go back home and I would call
Yeah.
my mom and I'm like, I'll want to pick my brain. I don't know what does that mean. And I
Yeah.
took that habit, and I realized that like throughout my different experiences, like
Mhm.
and it was so funny because like the first reaction to people, like when I started putting those one-on-ones, they were like, do I need to prepare anything? Am I in trouble? And
Mhm.
that made me realize like the the vision that we usually have of the HR and like us being proactive. And I really
Yeah.
emphasis on that because I feel like we're in a time, and in any company, whether we're small or big, there's always that impulse, especially today,
Mhm.
to really react and not be proactive. And even with myself, like I always put that discipline of like, not procrastinating, but like trying to also like take that distance to like think and
Mhm.
like see things in a bigger picture rather than react. And I think like those taking the time to do those one-on-ones to understand someone's vision and understand the bigger picture and kind of like forge your own opinion of that really sets you up for success, and at least like kind of owning
Mm.
the position that you're in. But also it's not just the position. When I say that, it's not about the title, it's really about the presence. And I think like
Mm.
even more so, I onboarded remotely. I didn't meet my boss until 2 months after, who's sitting in Paris. And for me, that was in my head, it clicked. I was like, okay, I'm definitely on board. This is real. But I really like thrive to understand how you can create a presence, how people can understand and get to know you for who you are
Mhm.
through a screen. And I think that's really not easy. The notion of being intentional, of not like, doing a million things when you're like having this conversation, is
Mhm.
so important because it just shows to people that you care. And I really like, my work at Daily Motion was really about like building that connection in the first place with people, and really building that foundation to help people hit the ground running, even when, we're in the company where like things need to still be like supported and foundations need to happen from a business perspective. But I think like if you have this like drive and impulse to say to people,
Mhm.
you're also part of building that vision. It's not,
Yeah.
just being there and sitting. Like you also have that autonomy and that creativity that can really contribute to the bigger picture. I think like a lot of the times, and it happens to all
Mhm.
of us, like we just like sit and wait for change to happen. But that's like the worst
Yeah.
mistake, because like we just sit there and we're like, okay, like it's like when you're in a meeting and like no one is holding themselves accountable for like what part of the project they're going
Mhm.
to focus on. And we're just like doing a round table. But how does that connect? And I think like in all, not just in HR, like there needs to be like those people that are connectors, facilitators, and that
Mhm.
can move along the organization to really create connection that needs to happen and that people are really
Mhm.
thriving to see, but they don't know how to, they either it's not their personality, or like they're more
Yeah.
introverted. And so like kind of how do you encourage that impulse? And I think it's really by leading by example. So
Mhm.
that was mostly, my work when I first started. Today, it's really about like how it's really business focused. Like, how do we
Mhm.
really support the business while supporting people as well? We have a lot of people that's, new people that started during the pandemic, and so
Mhm.
that didn't even meet each other yet. So it's like,
Wow.
how do you rethink that culture? How do you build trust? And I think like it's really, it doesn't weigh on just myself, but I think it weighs
Mhm.
on so many different components. And I need to really like, be that one driving, or like, letting the manager know, or letting the team members, or suggesting ideas, or really be a business partner to not just again the executive level, but also like the people that really need more guidance on a day to day, not just on admin things. And I think like that's where we have this like discipline as being in the people function, where we have this duty to show that like we're not just there in the wrong moments, but we're there to really
Mhm.
support you on a day to day when you just need to chat eventually.
I love that. Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that if HR schedules a one-on-one with you, oh no, I've done something wrong. This could be
Yeah.
the end of my career. But we don't want that feeling, right? So you know that HR is not doing their job if that's the feeling people get. So to your
100%.
point, you as an HR business partner, I mean, I know as a director currently, but you are being that business partner, not just to leaders, but as you mentioned, to employees as
People.
well. You're there to, you know, start conversations and pull ideas and creativity from people that, to your point, either don't have the personality or may feel they don't have the autonomy. They were all hired for a reason, and we want to make sure that everybody has a voice and is
Yeah.
contributing and is able to advocate for themselves, but also really focus on the business. And sometimes some of the quieter people have the best solutions. So having a culture where people can speak up and introduce those ideas and solutions oftentimes help a company create that consensus needed to kind of, change things or produce better outcomes, right?
True, true. And I feel like, you brought up a really interesting point. It's not just in my current role, but especially throughout 2020, I felt like one of the things that I remember is it was a rough time for me. Like I went through a lot, like personally, like I broke up with like my boyfriend of like 3 years and a half. He had like a breakdown, and
Oh.
like not really a breakdown. It was a life decision, but he moved to Montana. I decided not to follow. And
Mhm.
I just took that, like I didn't struggle mentally, because I was always already in a headspace of like,
Mhm.
I like this time is happening for a reason, and I need to sit with it. And we often feel like, we need to run away from like, I'm a very positive person, but I do think
Mhm.
like we all go through, moments where like we just don't feel great, or like we don't,
Yeah.
our mindset is not high. And I think like not running away from that feeling, but sitting with it, and accepting it, but not letting it be who we are, like
Mhm.
from like, from that point on. And I think like, um, what I realized is that my role, I always had those one-on-ones, and I would always like, do coffee, lunch, or like sit in a room with someone, and really like do that like one-on-one work. But I realized like through this time, and even going this through personally myself, like people started opening up more, and I had to do
Mhm.
more of a conscious effort to really be present in those conversations. And people like, that's where like people have always like been open to me in speaking, which I really take pride in, and I don't take
Mhm.
that lightly. I feel like that trust is something that you earn no matter what. And I think like it's by being constant, being authentic in who you are. And I think like it's hard, right, when you're in HR, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's like you need to find like the right like boundary and line. And I think like
Mhm.
you can not just share everything with someone. And
Yeah.
even just in general, you may hurt someone by like sharing something. And it's just like, how always asking yourself, how can I really help that person find the solutions within them, or give them hints so they can really
Mhm.
drive that questioning by themselves. But so many people during that time, when I was like going through that kind of like
Mhm.
self-reflection myself, were opening up and saying, hey, like, I have a learning disability, I have ADHD, or have an invisible disability. And not just
Mhm.
that, but like I started seeing people, even though I was seeing them physically, like already in person, in a very different light. And that just made me realize that like there's really a shift today in how companies should think about the future of their company culture
Mhm.
and what they're building. It's no longer about how does, people fit, how do people fit in my organization, but it's how am I going to create an environment where people are not just fits, but they're also cultural additions. And I think like, and most and foremost, that principle. And I had a full on, not argument, but an interesting conversation with like a
Yeah.
French counterpart who was like, yeah, but the fit is really important. And I was like, yeah, but
Mhm.
you're probably using the wrong term, because it's true. Like, you don't want to put someone in a position and set them for failure if like they're exposed to like, already an environment that can be toxic and things need to be rectified. Like, you have to really see the potential of that person to really grow and take on
Mhm.
and really have a voice and be respected for that. But I do think somewhat of a challenge, like also if you have like
Mhm.
the proper support, like it really helps you build that assertivity. Like, and I feel like I have a soft spot when it comes to, typically people that like sometimes like really doubt their voice. That is women,
Mhm.
that is underrepresented communities. Those are young people, those are like more junior levels. And I feel like everyone has their seat at the table. And instead of thinking of like organizations in a very pyramidal way, like it's thinking
Yeah.
about more of a circular way of thinking. How can we structure this company together as a circle, and not just like you sit in your corner, you do what you know you do
Mhm.
best, and they don't even know what they're doing best. And I feel like, maybe your best is even better, you just don't know it yet if you're in an
Mhm.
organization that puts you in a category and you cannot move from it.
Yeah, I think that distinction between a pyramid, org structure versus a circle is so key. And I know that many tech companies strive for that, or they claim that, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily true all the time as we,
Mm,
get in and we observe. And I know that there is almost an obsession with culture fit. Even though anyone in the HR space has heard of the term culture ad, but how do we actually go about, you know, enforcing that, right? And how do we
yeah,
actually produce an environment, and how do we change the hearts and minds of leaders that I totally understand they want to protect the culture, but the reality is that as your company scales, the culture isn't necessarily going to scale with it. It's going to evolve, right? And
absolutely.
I think that's important, right? You need a
Yeah,
different culture for a different stage of your journey in the career in the company, right?
true.
So what are some unique ways or suggestions that you have
Mm.
for people to maybe embrace culture ad in a company?
It's really about education. And I feel like, when you're in talent, like in HR, it's really about like repeating the same things over and over again, and also changing yourself, like checking your own
Mhm.
biases. And like, we all have biases. I remember of this woman who was giving a talk about biases. She doesn't say a word, she just goes on stage. There's this video playing, and it's about a little boy who's in a car accident with his mom. He's rushed to the hospital, and the doctor says, I cannot operate on this patient because he's my son. And the question is, like, who is the doctor? 99% of the room said, well, it can be, the dad, or sorry, I'm like saying the story in the wrong way,
Yeah.
but essentially he was in the car with his dad, not with his mom, and the
Ah.
doctor happened to be the mom. And in so many people's mindset, they couldn't conceive that the doctor was the mom. And I think like that
Mhm.
just goes by saying that we have a lot of biases that like and preconceptions and
Mhm.
ideas, and that we're embedded of as how we grew up and our cultures and how our language structures sometimes our thoughts. And I think like going back to that point, it's like really education and spending time and really being business partners when it comes to like the hiring stage, or and even like, you know, it's all throughout the employee journey. It's like, how do we give people channels and voices to really give that feedback? And so really like always checking with yourself as like an HR team or a talent team member, but also really reinforcing that work of like educating the hiring managers, really like, you know, also teaching, like, even if you're like a junior talent person, like when you're working directly with a hiring manager, like if they're seeing a candidate and like their main reason of like turning them down is like, oh, she didn't seem that dynamic. It's just like, well, but like concretely through the questions that, you know, you ask, like, what are the things that like she said or he said, and what did you think about it? Like you it's really going above the surface and going beyond and seeing someone's potential. And I think like even in my own, and I'm probably biased to that extent, but like when I hire someone on my team, like sure, okay, like, you know, the previous experiences matter, but it's really about like your ability to you know, transform that experience. And really like it's not about like BSing or it's really about like, how do you put that in action concretely? Give me stories or things that you're really proud of, where like, you know, you stood up for someone, you stood up to a hiring manager that was, you know, difficult to work with. Like it's just like understanding how that person's ability to like, you know, use the skill set and not just like hide behind like systems or tools, and really like being able to use that magic, because I think like that's really our own magic. And I've always like hired incredible people. Like I'm super proud, and I feel like, you know, it's like I always say like I'm there to support their voice as much as I'm supporting the people that come on board and I get to partner with. And like it's just like about building that confidence. I think like when there's that one person that believes in you in a company and that gives you that chance and that really like has this genuine care to see you be happy, not just succeed, because succeed means so many different things for so many different people.
Right.
I think it really like empowers you to step into your own, whatever that may be and means. But I think like it's really not about like being put immediately in a category, but seeing how that person can evolve. Like, you know, when we hire, it's always like, what is the long-term vision for that person? Like they're being hired at like a level 1, level 2, depending how companies talk about it. But like, what is that growth path for that person? Like, what could they be doing, or how could they grow? And I think like already, if you ask that at like you know, in your interview process, like I always see that as like a great point, because that means like people are already thinking about like that next step and projecting themselves. And I think like that's always a really good question to ask, and be really like, you know, ask like those specific questions, not just necessarily about the role that you're going for, but also for what's next, because that's important.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will respond to the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? With sort of, oh, you know, I don't even know what I'm having for lunch today. 5 years from now, I don't know what I'm going to be doing, which is totally fair. We don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's a really great question, or a great thought exercise at the least, to kind of see where your head is at, right? Or where your vision is, what your mission might be, or what that consistent theme might be for you, right? So kind of how you mentioned, you know, even though you had your twists and turns in your career, the one constant for you, it seems, was investing in people and empowering people, right? So I think answering the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? There's so much value for a hiring manager just to kind of understand where somebody's long-term vision is and whether they can support that growth, and how they can support that growth, right? So because we hope, right? It's not just the hiring manager, but even, on the employee side, both sides really want a long-term partnership to work out. But it's really hard to say because so much happens over the course of life and a company's life. But
Oh yeah.
I think, just these little tests or thought exercises to see what comes up, when we think about the long-term future, can give us a clue as to whether or not this is going to be the right environment, the right career path, whether we might need to do some work for this individual that we really want to bring on. But now I know these are some clues that they've given me as to how to retain them and what I can do to create a succession plan that's going to keep them around. Right.
Yeah. And I think like, everything that you said is so accurate. And it just like, it speaks so much to me because I just had a conversation this morning that really resonates with that. And I said to that person, if you don't ask, you're never going to get that information because there's so many things that, as you said, like, you ask to someone, even you see over what I think like the key to when you're in a managing position or leadership position, whatever it may be, it's like when you're a parent, like you avoid having, arguments in front of your kids or you avoid like, and it's okay. Like it can be hard because we're all humans, we all have our moments. I think being like candid and authentic and having, breakdowns like that is vulnerable. And I think like that is great because it just shows to your team that you're human too. But I think it's so important to keep that constant and to really be, that support. And also like it's the other way around too, but really like, that it's through trust that you build that. And I think like it really is, you lead by example. And I think like when you're in a position where people look up to you and little do they know that you also look up to them as well. Like one of the things that I got recently, it's like, a CEO that said, I look forward to learning from you. And I was like, how am I going to teach that person that has like 50 years of experience, like something, and that really gave me such a great confidence. And I think like it just like resonated with me so much. And you said something too. I think like, that passion and that drive, asking myself where I'm going to be in 5 years, I don't really know. I just want to do something that like I'm proud it's going beyond myself and that it's actually contributing to something that's having an impact and helping people, and that I'm also doing that work internally. But in all my work emails, I always have a quote at the end of my emails. And there's this woman that I have so much inspiration from, Maya Angelou. She said, people will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think like, there's people that show up in your life at very different moments that you lose sight of, and then you reconnect for one reason. And they will say, and I've said that to some people, they don't even know they had an impact on me, but I still remember them to the day because they helped me become who I am, and really, like said something at the right time. You were talking about this earlier, and I think like sometimes it's like really about the moment. It's like when you're listening to a song and it really hits that like mindset that you're in, and you're like hitting your stride. And I think like it's so important, like the way that you show up to the world, and how you choose wisely the words that you're having in a conversation, or how you carry yourself when you have a meeting or a presentation. It matters so much. And I think like it's not about being constantly under the radar, but it's really being authentic. Like some days, like as we said, like we can have a hard day, and just like showing up to your team and say, okay, I'm having a rough day, but I really care about this, and I care about you guys, or like changing the perspective too. I think like we talked about like, having this linear path. Things are not linear. Life is not linear, and life is movement. And I think sometimes like you need people that can be, there's that concept, of trickster, like people that kind of like change your way around of thinking about something. And you're like, you're leaving the conversation and you're like, wow, okay, I need to sit with that because it really changed my perspective on something. And I think like it's really by being, kind and caring and really like listening, and not just like hearing what people are saying, and really try to find ways to like put that into action. I think like there's a lot of the times there's not a big place for emotions in the workplace, or when you talk
Mhm.
about empathy or caring, like, or kindness, like you just like pass for a hippie. I literally got called a hippie by my former CEO that I really look up to and I appreciate. But I was just like, wow, like just because I really believe in those things. And
Yeah.
you know, when I left, he said, you know, you're not really a hippie. And I said, that's where you're wrong. I'm a pragmatic hippie. And so that
Yeah.
meant that I knew how to take the ideals and try to put it in the concrete day to day. But it's really, you know, you're always like confronted
Mhm.
to people that will kind of like, you know, because they don't know yet, or they're not asking
Mhm.
themselves those questions. But it's really about believing in you, I think, and you know, trusting that voice.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's like I feel versus I think, and I think like it's so important to really find that right balance, and really trusting that inner voice that we just like push
Mhm.
away most of the time because we're having those blinders. And you know, we have the title, we have the compensation, but
Mhm.
are you happy? Are you thriving? Are you putting your talents to action? You know, ask yourself those questions. And I think like it just, you know, what you put into the world
Mhm.
eventually, like, you know, comes into full blossom. And it's just seeds that maybe, you know, 1, 2, 3 years, like your podcast, you thought about this for some time, and like it
Yeah.
turned into a manifested into reality. And I think like it's everything starts with a dream and a
Yeah.
intuition and a feeling. And I think like it's so important to keep that in mind. We all started with something like that, and no matter who we are or how old we are, like there's something that ignites us that is like beyond kind of, you know, the things
Mhm.
that we're told. It's like trusting that intuition as well.
I love that. And I think what you said earlier about how life is movement, right? I think that just ties your point so well, that we have these seeds that we plant and it takes time, right, for them to bloom. But it really is just about taking, as you mentioned, those ideals and being pragmatic, putting them into action. And I think that's where a lot of HR individuals, a lot of HR folks, you know, it's our job to create these environments where people feel comfortable planting these seeds, and we provide them with the tools, we provide them with these actions to, you know, really manifest within the organization, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's just, you know, so much that we do that might not always seem like there's, you know, a checkbox that we can tick off, or an ROI
No.
or number necessarily, but it all just ends up producing in ways that we might not necessarily get the credit, or that we might not necessarily, you know, have necessarily the receipts, but you
Yeah.
know, it really is part and parcel of creating the soil really for everything that blooms in the organization. So it's sort of that thing where I totally see why a CEO would call you, or even other HR folks, you know, the hippie. But
It doesn't help with my curly hair. You know, I remember
yeah.
that one instance someone told me I had straight hair, and they were like, "Oh, you should do your hair more like that. It looks more professional."
Oh,
And
wow.
I was just like, "Wow!" And that came from a man, obviously. I think, you know,
Mm,
it's we're not talking too much about this, but I feel like, you know,
mm,
when you're still building that assertivity and that presence, you're
mhm,
confronted to, you know, people that will definitely challenge you in so many ways and make you
mhm.
doubt of yourself. And like, you know, how you present, like we've been through screens, and I think like that's definitely going to be like the future is going to be hybrid, like a mix of
Mhm.
in person and through Zoom and or
Yeah.
other mediums. But I think it's just like something where you have to really build like a certain strength about like those
Yes.
comments, and like try to find ways to also educate. I think it's
Mhm.
reacting and kind of like playing along the lines of like what they just said is not going to
Mhm.
help. But like really speaking in your voice and like finding a way to just like plant a message, I feel
Oh
like you're
yeah.
also helping other people along the way. But I feel it's so important, especially for young women, for any
Mhm.
woman. I feel like it's and just like people that don't, necessarily feel like, they have the legitimacy to speak. Like
Mhm.
everyone, you have a voice, you can speak. Like
Yes.
your words and your ideas matter. And I think like it's so important to have like to create like that kind of drive. And I think like,
Mhm.
we're accountable as like HR, as people that are working on the executive level, to really embody that. I think like
Mhm.
how they speak, how they lead their meetings, how do they give a voice to their team members, not just their direct reports, and how it's like communicated and transmitted. It's so
Mhm.
important. Like there's so much intentionality that needs to happen at that level. And I think that's why, talking about empathy, kindness, care, intention
Mhm.
is so important, because that's where true leadership is rooted. And that's how you are a good leader. It's when you lead the way by values that like just make people feel like they're joining what you're trying to
Mhm.
say or trying to build, and have their own ideas like brought to the table.
I love that. That is so beautiful. And I think more leaders should definitely try to embody what you just mentioned around having kindness, care, empathy as values that they lead with, and
Mm.
asking their team to join, rather than, I think, what we have been hearing about and what we try to, work against now in this new future era of work is the whole top down and pyramid, right? So we want to
Mm.
see more circles and opportunities for more connection.
Yeah, and I was thinking, because I knew we were gonna speak, and I was walking. I think a lot when I walk my dog, like those
Mhm.
are or in the morning, like when I'm by
Yeah.
myself and doing my little meditation, and I was like, wow, there's so many tools that have arrived in HR and everything in
Yeah.
admin, and I'm like, how is my work still very admin focused? I mean, there's still going to
Mhm.
be a person behind the data, the number, putting like all of the things like in a pretty setting, so it looks, readable and
Mhm.
accessible to other people like reading it. But I'm just like, I really need to think about like what is the future of HR, and like if
Mhm.
like tools and systems are going to be substitute to like a lot of like the work that we used to hire people for, like that very
Exactly.
notion of like I might be a director, but like my true profound title and like how I really see my work is like a connector, a mediator, and a business partner. Like I feel like it's so interesting to have this mindset, because that's where like, the real it's putting back the notion of people where exactly it needs to be. It's like, having those conversations, like being part of those like, strategic meetings, and how do we like not just treat that on the side, but really
Mhm.
incorporate it in the day to day. And I feel like, it's that's sometimes like the mistake that we do. Like there's such a structured way of looking at the company that like,
Mhm.
even topics like D&I that are so important, that are part of like every part of the strategy, and like, no matter what company you're in, like it's how do we incorporate those values that we believe in into all the things that we do, not just like, okay, we're going to have like
Mhm.
a team dedicated to this or to that. And I feel like that notion of business partnering
Mhm.
is going to be really something that's going to rise more and more into the HR side of things. And like, those tools that are arising
Mhm.
and that are becoming more and more intelligent, and like, synchronizing with other tools, it's definitely making me think of like, where is my added value? And I
Yeah.
know this, but I don't think like a lot of people are thinking about that and thinking about the future of work, as
Yeah.
you said.
Absolutely. I think with tools and systems, we have this added benefit of being able to be creative, right? And
Mm-hmm.
create, the culture that we want, besides talking about it and besides policing it, right? With
Mm-hmm.
culture fit, as we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah.
So now we have the creativity and the time, hopefully, to actually play around with the culture ad and see how we can, create more synergies between teams and not have as many silos. That's kind of the hope,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
there needs to be definitely, a common effort and really that drive to make things happen. One thing I will say though is like I know so many companies were so resistant, like whether they were
Mhm.
located in New York or San Francisco or any like bigger cities to like kind of like hire people remote or
Oh
and that has changed
yeah.
like completely, which it has opened the pool of talents for so many people that
Mhm.
like didn't have the means or the salary at the time that like would make them like able to work
Mhm.
within like those big cities. And I think like it also changes perspective. I know that like one of our executives at Dailymotion was super against. Like I remember having a conversation where I was like, so like I'm really happy this role is going to be remote, or at least like we'll be able to be hired remote.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, but it shouldn't be further in Connecticut. And I was just like, this is not remote. Like it's like literally an hour away from the city. So it's
Yeah.
really that like, again, it's about like and not getting discouraged. I think like
Mhm.
sometimes people that work on in the people field nowadays, especially in tech and very innovative spaces, there's just like that sometimes you repeat the same things over and
Mhm.
over again because you're confronted to people that don't necessarily understand the impact of certain things. And like it's really being patient and kind towards yourself in the first place and
Mhm.
not feel defeated when I usually have a no, it's like, okay, how can I find another way to approach that topic? Because this is so important.
Love
And
that.
it just, I think it's, it's really rethinking. Like we used to, it's like we didn't have, and we were talking about this earlier. It's like eventually, and I keep hearing that eventually when we get out of this pandemic or like we go
Mhm.
back to normal,
We're
I
delaying
mean,
it.
we're delaying it. And it's just like, it's that's this, and I always go back to this article that came out in the New York Times called Languishing. And it's about like kind of just like that moment of like just sitting and languishing like a snail, and like also like
Mhm.
this FOMO like of nowadays, like where things are reopening, like and New York is like back to almost where it was, but
Yeah.
like to a certain extent. But it's just like, how do we balance everything? Like we keep in motion and we allow ourselves to wonder and to really feel what it is that we want and what is like
Mhm.
important for us today without like trying to rush things and like try to like, check the box on everything. And I think like that can
Yeah.
that's going to be very interesting. I think like we're still in the midst of it, and I think like it's going to be really a self-discipline that people are going to have to do because the
Mhm.
market has never been like that, like crazy. Like
Oh
companies are
yeah.
hiring like crazy, benefits are changing so much. And I
Mhm.
think, some of the things a company can think of is like, okay, what are the things that I'm offering today for people? Because
Mhm.
honestly, like flexibility, I think is a big one. And that like trickles down to benefits, that trickles down to like that ability to have flexible work hours, whether you're a parent, whether like you do something else on the side or you have a passion. And I feel like those are things that like some companies were very resistant to. And today it's just like, how can we find like the right things for the people joining our companies and what is important to them? And I think like there's still that like thing that of questioning like what we have done in the past, what we're doing now, and what we need to do for this kind of new mindset of thinking the workplace.
Absolutely. We are on the cusp of this new mindset. Some companies have really championed it, right?
Mm,
And I think we're seeing a lot of evidence within the tech space, but unfortunately, a lot of these companies tend to be startups as well. So it's really difficult for
mhm,
them to really live and breathe the whole work life balance, even though they may provide flexibility. Those are two separate things, right? Like you could be working
mhm.
a flexible schedule, but working many more hours than in a typical 9 to 5 that doesn't budge from that schedule. So,
True.
so many things to think about. But I really appreciate your time, Allison, and all of your insights on HR and your career journey and what being a true business partner means in today's age.
No, thank you so much, Neha. I really appreciate you having me, and I feel like even it has inspired me to like really keep driving things the way that I've been doing, and also challenge myself in new perspectives as well. Like all I ask is to be surprised by like new ideas and concepts, and I love that. I think like there's so many creative people and creative outlets, and we just need to find like a right way to implement that in the workplace. So
Mhm.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate you.